The Walking Dead Dead City, Episode 5, Stories We Tell Ourselves. This is the second to last episode of the first season of Walking Dead Dead City, and this one it was really well done, and it was probably, I guess, story-wise, could be considered the strongest one of the season. But for me, there are some things in this episode I really like. I think is very interesting. And there's some things that are done in this episode that I didn't really like that much. And we'll get into it here, but there's quite a bit that happens, so let's just get right to it. So basically, we're picking up from last week where Maggie, Ginny, and the two others, Tommaso and Amaya or something, are going into the sewers where all the walkers are, and they're like, there's like that methane or whatever gas in the sewers because of the bodies and stuff, and that's kind of their struggle that they got to get through it to get out, and that's where we're picking up with them. And that storyline is where I have issues with. We'll get into it once we get to that, but there's some weird stuff that happens with that whole story of this episode, but it ends really interestingly. So the other story that we do have to follow is Negan and the Marshal, and the Marshal is obviously with Negan now because Negan saved him. I don't know why still. I really don't get it. I guess it's just like this new Negan that we're trying to once again show us. He saved the Marshal. Now he's with him, and the Marshal took him captive in some, I guess in some way, because he's injured, so he can't really move around a whole lot. So he's got his weapon pointed at him. He's kind of got him held captive, sort of, and he's trying to get him out of the city. And they basically go on this big journey through this episode of wandering around the city a bit and like discovering who each other are and learning about each other, and then they kind of tell stories at the end. In the sewers, you cut back to the sewers. They're trying to find their way. You can see like there's a bunch of nastiness that they do into the sewer stuff in this episode. It's really gross stuff, and it kind of makes sense. They're just sitting in there rotting away, all these different walker bodies and stuff like that. It's really gross. You get to see a bunch of weird, gross stuff. The Marshal and Negan, they're wandering around the city. They get surrounded by walkers. They get stuck into a building. They see some things, and they don't really do a whole lot. It's Negan trying to kind of get away from the Marshal, kind of in his own way, and the Marshal's just kind of leading him around random places. Tommaso, it's funny in this episode with these two characters, the new ones, Tommaso and Amaya. I kind of finally learned their names, and it almost doesn't matter now because we'll get to that. He finds, while they're wandering around the sewers, he finds these two oxygen tanks because they can't breathe well in the sewers, and eventually they're going to start kind of losing their minds, as we see later. And he finds these two oxygen tanks conveniently, and Maggie immediately is like, that's strange. So she starts to put the pieces together. Why did the Croat know that they were coming? He obviously knew they were coming, and he had everything set up already that they weren't going to be in there. Their whole plan fell apart, and now they're stuck in these sewers trying to get out. And she puts the pieces together that he found the oxygen tanks because he had them the whole time, I believe, and he put his bag down and he pretended to find them, and he had them the whole time. So he betrayed them all, and he said he was doing it for Amaya. It was basically like this whole thing of he betrayed his entire group and basically got them all killed from the Croat to protect and get out of the city with Amaya or something like that. And it almost seemed like he wasn't really necessarily like a bad guy. He did betray them and he got most of them killed, but he wasn't really a bad guy in the sense. He just was very misguided, and he thought that helping the Croat take out his people basically would protect him and Amaya, and he would eventually get out with her, and that was his plan. So they discover that Tommaso, this guy, has betrayed that entire group, and he got most of them killed, and now there's this tension between him and Amaya, and then this Maggie and Ginny in there as well. There's this whole weird tension that they kind of built up for a quick moment. I don't really know why they did this, because what they do to these characters right after, it's like, what was the point? Okay. So we cut back to Negan and the Marshal. They're wandering around through a building. They see another person who basically committed suicide, in some grotesque, nasty way. And it brings back like memories for the Marshal because he went and saw his brother who also did the same thing. He basically ended up killing himself later into the apocalypse because he kind of just gave up, and they ran across another person who did that. And then, Negan and the Marshal, they're trying to, escape through the building, and Negan finds a walker. So he finds a walker, and he doesn't tell the Marshal that he sees one. So eventually, once they cross the corner of the building, he throws the walker on the Marshal, and he tries to escape from the Marshal. Eventually, they do this thing with Negan again, where he's like trying to help the Marshal generally overall, because Negan tries to escape, and the Marshal ends up catching him. He couldn't find a way out, so he catches right back up to him. And the Marshal, he's so injured, so he can't even really walk anymore. And Negan ends up seeing that, and he's like, oh, God damn it, I'll help you. Just leave the guy. Just leave the guy. I don't know why you're. I don't know. They're trying to do this thing with Negan where he's like this new nice guy, and it's like, I get it. I know what they're trying to do, but it's almost kind of tiring. Just let him die. Just leave him. He's trying to kill you. He's trying to bring you in. He's trying to bring you in for crimes, and it's like, just leave him. Just leave him. But we cut back to Maggie, and she's starting to hallucinate in the tunnels, the sewers, because that's something they warned of earlier, like the gases in the tunnels and the sewers itself, they can't hardly breathe in there. So she's starting to hallucinate and see visions again. And we're getting this vision of her. Basically, I would assume it's when the Croat attacked, and it's her like freaking out with Herschel getting taken from the Croat. And we're getting little glimpses of that. We've seen this in the trailers and stuff too. And we cut back to Negan killing Glenn again. So I say it like every week now. I don't know. The show seems to just generally be setting up the point of, sure, Negan and Maggie, they kind of resolve their conflicts in a way in the main show. But now that we have this new show, we literally have to tear that wound right back open completely. And we're just going to be pitting Negan versus Maggie again. That's generally what this show seems to be doing right now. They've kind of been a little bit of a team in this show, but with the way the episode ended, it just seems like this show is literally just trying to set them back up as sworn enemies. And Negan almost doesn't want to be anymore, and Maggie is like full blown. She just hates Negan like completely again, and she just cannot get over it. So she's continuing to see like flashbacks and PTSD of Glenn getting killed, which I get it. I get that part, but they're showing us this over and over again. It's like, okay, we get it. We know you're trying to show that Negan and Maggie are just never going to get along. And then we get to the part that I don't like at all. And it's the Tommaso and Amaya character. They're basically just in the tunnels, and they're just lying there. They're just sitting around because they're worn out, and Maggie kind of fell over and she was hallucinating. So they sit down for a moment. There's the tension between all the characters. And then walkers just attack. They're literally surrounded by a ton of bodies. And they get caught off guard by some walkers that just start getting up and attacking them. And guess what happens? I said this when they first came in, like these are characters that are probably just going to come in and then die eventually and not really matter overall. And as the episodes went on, I'm like, okay, these could be some characters that stay throughout the show for a while, and they develop these new characters as, significant characters into the show, like later, like in another season or two. No, they're exactly what I thought they would be. They're just another group of people that just end up all dying eventually, and they didn't really matter overall. They were just kind of there to aid Maggie and Negan through their story. And I get it. We're following Negan and Maggie. It makes sense. Like, this is just very clearly a Negan and Maggie story. It was always billed that way. It was always shown that way, that it is their story. I get it. But you could still have these new characters come in there and be a big part of the story. And I was, with that whole like betrayal thing they did with the one guy, he ends up dying too. So they both end up dying from these walkers. So they both get killed off. And what they were doing with him is like, okay, that was something really interesting for once. They had him betray the one chick, Amaya, and his whole group. And there was that whole thing with him, like, basically almost helping the Croat to protect Amaya. And it was something interesting they finally did with him there. And now they're both dead. They're dead. That whole story's just done. And it doesn't matter now anymore. Like, I guess it mattered at that moment in the story, but it's just done now. Like, they serve no more purpose. They're just done. So, there's that. So, they're dead now. And I just didn't like it. I thought they could have been very interesting characters. I think we could have gotten a lot more with them, and it's kind of upsetting. I know we have a lot more characters still, new characters too, in the show. And speaking of new characters, we do get a new character in this episode. So, the Croat. We jump like halfway through the episode. The Croat finally shows back up. He's pissed off. And he's seemingly because Negan got away. And, he kind of got his way because he knew they were coming. But he wanted to get Negan, and he didn't manage to capture Negan. He seemed like he wanted to capture Negan. So he's going to this building, and he's meeting up with this random lady in this building with like a bunch of different people playing music in this big theater area. It's like this little town center type of area where like everyone gathers to meet up with the leader, and they go into the room and they chat with her, and it's like, who is this lady? It's like suddenly she is like the top person, and the Croat is like talking to her like, I'm sorry, I failed. She's pissed off that he failed and he didn't get Negan, and they need Negan. That is a big point that they mentioned here, this conversation between these two, this lady. They're talking about how important it is that they have Negan. They want Negan to like maybe join them or something. I don't necessarily know yet, but there's this big plot of them needing to get Negan. So they really, really want Negan. And that again plays into the Maggie story that we jump into at the end of the episode. But they really want Negan. And again, the whole dynamic between the Croat and this lady is super strange. Like suddenly the Croat, he was this top guy that everyone was fearing, and suddenly he is just like he's like another soldier to an upper power. And it could be interesting. Like, we don't know much about her yet. Like, I think she could be a very interesting character. We don't know much about her yet. But I really liked that there was this main villain character that was once a savior with Negan. And suddenly he is now the big main bad guy. And he has this history with Negan. And suddenly now this lady, like, he's basically like bowing to her and like kissing her hand and stuff. It's like, what is this? I don't know. I don't know how it's going to go. I don't know what the story's going to do. And we have one more episode of the season left. I mean, we'll see where it goes, but suddenly they've introduced this entire new dynamic of this new character, and it's almost like the Croat is serving someone else. So it's like he went from Negan and he just jumped to somebody else to serve instead of becoming his own power. And I don't know if I like that. We'll see. But this whole dynamic with this new random villain lady, it could be good. It could be good. I just don't like what it did with the Croat's character. That's what I don't like. We jump back to Maggie and Ginny, the only two surviving people left in the sewers. And Maggie's basically, it's like she's talking to Ginny constantly like, Negan, you shouldn't trust Negan. Negan's bad. And while she's also saying that Negan is like this terrible guy, you shouldn't trust him, she's also telling him about what happened with the Croat and how the Croat, he came in, this bad man, he came in and he took my son and he took all of our food and our grain, and we're coming back to find my son and stop this and everything. And this is a story that she's told and she's telling Ginny now. And Ginny, obviously, she's not spoken like once in this entire show. That's kind of the point, like the thing of her character. She doesn't speak. And Maggie is constantly trying to express her feelings towards Negan in this whole situation from her point of view. We get this final scene with the Marshal and Negan. They find refuge into a bus, and the Marshal's obviously quite hurt. So the Negan, he finds like a first aid kit in the bus, and he helps him out a little bit, and they kind of stop the talk. And the Marshal mentions the whole thing about his brother and how he went to find his brother, and he escaped the city with his whole family, but he left his brother behind. And that note that he had was like the last thing he had of his brother. And he kind of goes on about how, I left my brother. I abandoned my brother. And then when he came back, obviously it was way too late. So we got a little bit of a story. We knew the story already, but It's kind of like him telling Negan, so it's like these two characters are kind of bonding in a way now, and I don't know where it's still gonna. I still don't know where it's gonna go. It's like Negan is constantly trying to convince him that, like, dude, the people that I killed that you're coming after me for, they attacked my wife, and if you would have seen what they did to my wife, then you wouldn't be, you probably wouldn't be trying to bring me in or something like that. You know, it's like the marshal's just trying to do his job, and Negan's basically saying they attacked my wife, and that's why I killed him. And then the marshal's telling him his. It's just like a bonding between these two characters. I don't know if the marshal's still going to be trying to bring him in or not. We'll see where that goes. But the Marshal, I think he will be a character that sticks around. Unlike the other two characters I thought maybe would. I think the Marshal definitely will stick around. I know he was like advertised too as like one of the bigger. He's definitely a bigger character than those two. So I hope he sticks around. I said that about like the other two as well. Like I hope we get some main characters from this new show that stick around. I do. So we jump back to Maggie, and she has to fight this like. She yells for Ginny to run off and climb up a ladder and escape through a tunnel, and she fights off this like mutated walker thing. It's not like a variant walker like we saw. It's literally just this like squished together bunch of walkers that she has to fight, and it basically creates this monstrosity of a walker, and it's like a bunch of walker heads poking through it. There's a bunch of arms, and it's just like this big thing, and it's very interesting. It's very creepy, and I really love to see that, just this unique thing they do with walkers. They constantly try to do new things with walkers, and I think this was a very creative one. I think this one was really fun. She obviously takes them all out. We're not going to kill Maggie. And when Maggie finally defeats it, she climbs up the ladder that Ginny did, and then she sees this. She's still kind of hazy and hallucinating, and she sees liar written on the wall in front of her in blood. And we all know that Ginny went up that ladder too. She went that same exact way. And I don't know if Ginny wrote this. I'm thinking that Ginny wrote this in blood, probably with some walker guts or whatever. It says liar, and it's like, why does that say liar? What's going on? So we jump back to the flashback. We jump to kind of a flashback with Ginny when she was leaving the new hilltop. And we saw her when she was looking over at the grain in her, the area in the hilltop. She was like looking over there. I didn't really know what to make of it. Like, it was kind of random, and now it makes sense. It's like the story of the Croat coming in and taking all of the grain and the food and Herschel and everything like that from them. It's not true. Part of it's true, but not all of it's true. The hilltop has their food. They have their grain. The Croat did take Herschel, but everything that Maggie's saying about what happened is not necessarily true. She's not telling the whole truth. So Ginny knows that, and Ginny is very close with Negan, so she's not very happy with what's going on here. She can see the pieces. She's seeing that Maggie is not fond of Negan, and she can see that Negan has been brought there by Maggie. So we jump back to Maggie's flashback when we finally get to see the whole thing play out, and the Croat's there. So we get to see him, the Croat, and Maggie, and we get to see what exactly the Croat wants. So this is the whole story that we didn't really know before. We know the Croat took Herschel, and that Maggie wants to get Herschel back. That part is true. But it seems that the Croat wants Maggie to actually bring Negan to the city. So what the Croat really wants, he wants something, it seems, in exchange. That's what I'm assuming. He wants something in exchange for her son. The Croat wants Negan. And that is something we established in this episode. He really wants Negan, and that lady that he's working with really wants Negan on the island. And he hands Maggie this wanted poster that we've seen many times now of Negan. So that's basically the assumption of the Croat wants Maggie to bring Negan to the island. And that is exactly what Maggie did. So Maggie didn't really want Negan's help, to find the Croat and convince him to give his son. No, Maggie wanted Negan on the island with her because she wants to bring Negan to the Croat. She wants to trade Negan for her son. That is the assumed story that I'm now getting that. So in reality, she does want to get her son back, but it's not just like a go get her son and save him type of mission. It's an exchange. She wants to exchange him. And not really surprising. She's never liked Negan. She never will like Negan. So it seems the whole story now is, again, as I said earlier, it's to pit Negan and Maggie against each other once again. And I think this whole thing of Negan and Maggie, like if this whole thing comes to light of, Negan finds out that Maggie was going to trade him and you give him over to the Croat, like I could see Negan turning on Maggie. And, he's been kind of hesitant. He hasn't had any reasons to be against Maggie anymore. But, I could see this becoming a thing where you're going to, make Negan a villain again towards you. And you kind of did it yourself. And that's kind of the whole story I see that's going forward with them. We'll see. But I think this whole show is really going to turn into a major conflict between those two. And maybe it was always destined to go that way. But it was kind of initially teamed up like they're going to team up and go against this guy. But it's kind of changing a little bit. Ginny gets out of the tunnels, and at the end she lights off a flare. I'm assuming it's just to maybe have Negan find her, because Negan does see the flare. Maggie also sees the flare, and I'm assuming everyone else in the city is going to see this flare. So the episode ends with Ginny lighting off a flare, and I'm assuming everyone is going to maybe collide at one place. I don't know. We'll see what happens, but I think it's all going to come to light once Negan goes and tries to find Ginny. And Maggie also tries to find Ginny. I think it's all going to come crashing together. And Negan, we saw in the teaser for next week that Negan and Maggie are going to be fighting. I don't know how much fighting will be going on between those two characters, but they did set up major conflict between Negan and Maggie now. And that whole story that was not known before is now known. And we'll see where it goes. There's some stuff in this episode I did like. There's some stuff in this episode I didn't like at all. And it's not my favorite one. I think one of my... last week, I enjoyed last week a lot more. Just some interesting things with the flashback in the beginning of the episode last week. I think I enjoyed it more. But this was still a very strong episode. And it's still a great and well done show. It really is. If you compare it to the other Walking Dead spinoffs, this show is phenomenal. It really is. And it's better than The Walking Dead season 11. It's better than the last season or two of Walking Dead. I think it is. And I think there's a lot of potential for this show, even with those twists. It just really shows that this is very much a Negan and Maggie centric show. And if you have any other main characters, they really can't be... you can't really look at them and say, oh, they're going to be in this show for the long run. You don't really know. I thought those other two were going to be in this show for a while. No, they're dead. Maybe the Marshal will die next week. I don't know. But that's where the episode ends, and we'll see where this whole story ends for this season. I think we're doing more seasons 2 for this show. And I think they're building a bigger story, though, especially with that lady that came in. I think they're building a much bigger plot to unfold than just... we find this guy, get her son back, and kill this guy, and that's it. So we'll see where it goes. Good episode, but it was there's some stuff in it that I didn't like, some stuff in it I did like, and it's a good story so far, though.